Hey, Boker Tov, everyone. So let's pick it up. We started the Mishnah yesterday. Let's have a look at it again. We're at the Mishnah at the bottom of Kaf Daled Amud Aleph. Again, we're dealing with the issue of Tzeidah on Yom Tov, or in this case, actually Tzeidah from Erev Yom Tov, but how that relates to us on Yom Tov. Again, these the same thing would apply on Shabbat, but on Shabbat it would be muktzah anyway because there's nothing you can do with the animal, except on Yom Tov if you have the animal trapped, so you could use it to cook it or eat it or whatever. So says the Mishnah, Mitzudot chayav ve'of dagim, shasa'an me'elav Yom Tov, lo yitor men b'Yom Tov, ela im ken yodea shenetzodeh me'elav Yom Tov. Right, so you have traps of animals. Again, the Mishnah just lists different types of animals, fowl, fish, etc. But these traps were made on Erev Yom Tov. Lo yitor men b'Yom Tov. You cannot take the animals now from the traps on Yom Tov. Ela im ken yodea shenetzodeh me'elav Yom Tov. Unless you know for certain that the animals were trapped before Yom Tov. If they were trapped on Yom Tov itself, so it's going to be muktzah. And if we don't know if it was trapped on Yom Tov itself, so then we're going to assume that maybe it was. As we explained yesterday, this is going to be a safek. Even though normally we say safek drabanan lekula, and you have safek muchan, which we would assume would be a safek drabanan. Nonetheless, we said sometimes things that are very, very common, Rabbanan said it's going to be asur anyway, or we explained it might be a davar sheyesh lo matirin. Muktzah is going to be a davar sheyesh lo matirin because after Yom Tov the animal is no longer going to be muktzah. Okay, so mitzudoch ha'va'of dagim shasan me'ev Yom Tov lo yitol me'en b'Yom Tov ela im ken yodea shenetzodeh me'elav Yom Tov. U'maaseh b'nochri echad. Now the Gemara gives us the Mishnah gives us a maaseh, gives us a practical case that happened. Nochri echad shavit agim Rabban Gamliel. Certain one Jew came and brought Rabban Gamliel fish. He brought them on Yom Tov. Ve'amar mutarinen. So Rabban Gamliel said these are mutar, these are permitted. Ela she'eno tzoni lekabel imena. However, I don't want to take them from him. Interesting. Rashi of Yashes ela she'enani otze lekabel imeno she'ani son'o. That this is an enemy of mine, maybe. Okay, for whatever reason. But the interesting thing is, why does Rabban Gamliel say that it is mutar? Also, the Gemara is going to ask, when we say mutar, what do we mean? Do we mean mutar that it's not muktzah, mutar even you could eat them? Okay, but we've just said that if you take the animals from the traps on Yom Tov, even if there's a safek that they were caught on Yom Tov, it would be asur. And here, Rabban Gamliel says it's mutar. So that's very strange. It's very strange. It doesn't say, if the Mishnah had said, this is the din and it's mutar, or it's asur. That's the opinion of Tanakama, that's the opinion of Chachamim, but Rabban Gamliel says says mutar. So that I would understand. But here it's almost brought this case is brought to back up the ruling of the Mishnah. It's brought as a proof, but it's actually saying the opposite thing. So that's why the Gemara says Maseh listor. Maseh listor, meaning you've brought your Maseh not as a support, but you brought it actually as a contradiction. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, Maseh listor b'tmi'ah. וכי דרך המדברים לומר דבר, ומביאים מעשה אחריו להחיש דיבור הראשון. It's not the way people speak. It's not the way the Mishnah should speak. That you say something, and then you bring the proof, which is actually not the proof, but is a contradiction. That's very, very strange. So says the Gemara, Chasurei mechasra v'hachiktani. Meaning the Mishnah has left words out, and this is the way that you should read it. You should read it as if there are extra words in the Mishnah. It's always strange, and it's always, especially for new students of Gemara, when you have this expression of Chesurei mechasra v'achiktani, it's very, very strange, right? We're saying essentially that the Mishnah doesn't say what it's meant to say. It's got a whole section of the Mishnah that's just not written in the Mishnah. We have to insert the words. Why is the Mishnah written that way? So it could be that part of the reason why the Mishnah is written that way is because, remember, we're dealing with Torah Sheba'al Peh. The Gemara in Gittin says, Tvarim Sheba'al Peh, you are not allowed to write down the Torah Sheba'al Peh. It was meant to be transmitted orally. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was allowed to write it because of Eit La'asot L'Hashem Efero Toratecha. We have to uproot the Torah at a certain time in order to preserve the Torah. When Rabbi Yehuda Nasi understood that it was going to be lost, so he wrote it down in the Mishnah. However, even in the Mishnah, it's written down in a way that is somewhat cryptic. It's by design. It's by intention. It's not by coincidence. And that is so that even though it's written down, we still have the oral tradition that comes with it. In any event, This is the way you should read the Mishnah, says the Gemara. Safek muchan asur. Essentially, the Mishnah tells me that safek muchan is the opposite of muktzah, right? Muktzah means that it's set aside. Muchan means that it's not set aside. I mean that it's for use on Yom Tov. So saying which is safek muchan, because I don't know if it was trapped on Yom Tov or before, that is asur. That's what the Mishnah says. Rabban Gamliel matir. Okay. Tanakama says it's asur. Rabban Gamliel says it's mutar. Umaseh nami. And Yaris Maseh to prove it. Maseh nami b'nochri echad shavita gim Rabban Gamliel v'amam mutarinen. Right, so essentially, yeah, that's the way that we should read the Mishnah. There are two different opinions. There's the opinion of Tanakama, even though in the Mishnah itself it doesn't say it explicitly, but there's the opinion of Tanakama that says Safek Mochan is Asur, and then Rabban Gamliel holds differently. He says that it is Mutar, and we have a Maaseh, we have the story to prove Rabban Gamliel's view. Again, that doesn't prove that the halacha follows Rabban Gamliel. It just proves that that's what Rabban Gamliel held, because that was the case that happened with him. 3 lines from the bottom, towards just past halfway through the line. Amar Rav Yehuda Mashmuel, Ein halacha Rabban Gamliel. Okay, so Rav Yehuda says the name Mashmuel, halacha is not like Rabban Gamliel. We paskin like the Chachamim, and we saw this yesterday in the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, now says the Gemara, so there are those who have this right, when Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Shmuel, Ein halacha Rabban Gamliel, what's he talking about? What's he talking about? So he says that like that's following the Mishnah. Okay, the Ika Damatni Laha. There are those who say when Rav Yehuda Mashmuel said Ein halacha Rabban Gamliel, he wasn't relating to the Mishnah. It's going to be the same. It's going to come out as the same thing, practically speaking. But they say that he was saying this about the Braita. Titania, Safek Muchan, Rabban Gamliel Matir, Rabbi Yeshua Oser. Amar Rav Yehuda Mashmuel, halacha k'Rabbi Yoshua. Okay, so here you see a bright that says explicitly, Rabban Gamliel says Safek Muchan is mutar, Rabbi Yoshua says asur, and Rav Yehuda Mashmuel says halacha follows Rabbi Yoshua. Again, it ends up being the same thing. Just the question is, what did Shmuel say? Did he say ein halacha k'Rabban Gamliel? If he was talking about the Mishnah, he could say ein halacha Rabban Gamliel because it doesn't tell us who the Tanakama is. Or if you're saying the Braita, he says halacha follows Rabbi Yoshua, right? Rather than saying ein halacha Rabban Gamliel. But again, it comes out really as the same halacha. And then there are those who say no, it was about this Braita. Titania. And to the next Amud now. Titania. Shuchtin min hanegarin b'yom tov. אבל לא מן הרשתות ומן המכמורות. So look at Rashi here. Rashi on Amud Bet. He says shochtin min negarin. Negarin is going to be a synonymous with the word bivarin, which we saw earlier. It's kind of these enclosures where you have the animals. So Rashi says shochtim chayot min bivarim lefi shenitzodim v'yomdim. Right? Again, the type of bivarin where the animal is already considered trapped. That's what he says, nitzodim v'amdim. But you can take your animal there and you can do the shechita on Yom Tov. V'Hashem shosin sham nigarei mayim v'charitzin lishtot achayot sham korelu nigarei. Okay, it just explains the name. Aval lo min hareshatot ve'min hamichmorot. Okay, these are different types of nets. Meaning I can go and take the animal from the enclosure where I had it, but if I have the animal in a net or if I have it in a trap, then I can't go and do the shechita on Yom Tov. Lo min hareshatot, says Rashi, matzah chaya b'mitzudato. You found the animal in the trap. Safek nitzod hayom, safek nitzod etmol. It's a safek. I don't know if it was trapped today or if it was trapped on Yom Tov or before Yom Tov. So as we've said, that is going to be asur. That is opinion number 1. That is Tanakama, and that follows Rabbi Yoshua, and that follows what we see in our Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Ba'u metza'an mekulkalin me'erev Yom Tov, b'yadua she'me'erev Yom Tov nitzodu u'mutalin. Ba'u metza'an mekulkalin b'Yom Tov, b'yadua she'b'Yom Tov nitzodu v'asulin. So Rabbi, so until now we said you come and find the animals in the traps, and it's a safek. You don't know when it was trapped. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, he adds here another parameter. He says, you come along and you found the traps. Mekulkalin me'erev Yom Tov. On erev Yom Tov, it's already been broken. So then you know. So then you know that what? That the animal's been trapped. And therefore it'd be mutar. Therefore it'd be permitted. B'Yom Tov, but if you came on Yom Tov and then you found them, you found they were broken, then you would know that it was trapped on Yom Tov and it would be Asur. So Rashi explains over here, he says, Bam Erev Yom Tov, Lemakom Shayu Pulsim. You come on Erev Yom Tov to the place where the traps have been set up. Vein Borech Mil or Chatzi Mil. Okay, so it's very long. It's got a rope or whatever. I don't know exactly what the trap looks like, but it's very long. Ukshchayan nofelet bilrosho echad, mitoch shemitpareket umitnateket latzet, hamtzudot mitkalkalot kulan. What happens is when the animal gets stuck in the trap on the one side, so it tries to break free and it tries to get out, and the whole thing breaks. So on the other side, right, Rosho Hasheni nitak mimakom shenitka. The other side of the trap gets dislodged, right? V'simanu lo shesh chaya b'rosh ha'acher. Meaning that's the point, because Rashi is trying to explain to us when it says if you come on Erev Yom Tov, if you come on Erev Yom Tov and you see. You have to work out whether the animal's been trapped or not. Surely you could have just seen the animal. So no. So you imagine the trap is very long, and on the one side where the animal is trapped, that's where a person doesn't see it. But a person sees the trap on the other side, and therefore he knows that the animal has been trapped. Now, if you see the trapped on Yom Tov itself, so here Rashi says Nitkalkulu b'Yom Tov al kocha achi mashma. You have to say this. Shevadai nitkalkulu b'Yom Tov, that it was definitely trapped or that it broke on Yom Tov. Kagon shebadkan mishachashecha v'lo yom. You came and you checked it on your way to shul. You came and you checked it just before Yom Tov came in, and you saw it was still intact. And then in the morning, when you're on your way to Shachrit, you see that it's now that it's broken. And this is what we're going to ask now. Because the point is, if you just saw the trap broken on Yom Tov, it doesn't necessarily tell you if it was broken before Yom Tov or not. If you see it broken before Yom Tov, there's no question. So here the Gemara says like this: "It's hagufa kasha." What we've just said there's a contradiction in terms, an internal paradox here. Amalta ba'u mitzan mekulkalin me'erev Yom Tov b'yadua shem'elev Yom Tov nitzodu. Tama the ba'u mitzan mekulkalin hasfeik asurin. So he says like this: if you came and you saw on erev Yom Tov, so then b'yadua shem'elev Yom Tov nitzodu. Then we know. It's only if we saw it on Erev Yom Tov that we saw the trap was broken. So we know for sure that the animal was trapped on Erev Yom Tov, and then it's going to be mutar. But what if it was a safek? What if I didn't know? The implication is that a safek is going to be asur. Okay, well, so far so good. Safek asurin. But now we say ema seifa. But now look at the seifa. Look at the second part of the Braita, and you'll see that the diuk is exactly the opposite. Right? Ema Sefer. Ba'u mitza'an mekulkalin b'Yom Tov, b'yadua she'b'Yom Tov nitzodu. If you come along and you see that it's trapped on, that it's broken on Yom Tov, well, then you know that the animal was trapped on Yom Tov. Because you know because you came and you found that it was broken. Asveika. Me'elev Yom Tov nitzodu umutarin. In other words, it's only if I definitely know that it was trapped on Yom Tov, that's when I say that it's asur. But what's the inference? What's the implication? That if I don't know, then I could say that it's a safek, and I could say maybe it was on Erev Yom Tov, then it's going to be mutar, right? The Reish of the Braita tells me that if I came on Erev Yom Tov, and only in a case where I came on Erev Yom Tov and found that the trap was broken, then it's mutar to take the animal. The Sefer tells me only in a case where I came on Yom Tov itself and found the trap was broken, then it's asur to take the animal. But the implication is only that's the case that you know. So what about the case where you don't know? In other words, the case that it's a safek, that's going to be the opposite. So from the Reisha, it turns out that if there's a safek, it's going to be asur. Because the Reisha tells me only if I know that it was trapped on Erev Yom Tov, that's mutar, and any other case is asur. But the Sefer tells me that only in the case where I know that it was trapped on Yom Tov, because I saw the trap before and I saw the trap that was broken on Yom Tov itself, that's where it's asur. But if I don't know for a fact that it was on Yom Tov, it's a safek, so then the implication is that would be mutar. So the Reisha versus the Sefer is a complete contradiction. That's the Hagufa Kasha. That's what the Gemara is telling me. So Achikama. So says the Gemara now, this is the way that we have to read it. We have to read it as follows. Hachikama means to say, Ba umetza'an mekulkalin me'erev Yom Tov. Beyadua she'me'erev Yom Tov nitzodo umutalin. If I come on Erev Yom Tov and find that the trap's been broken, so then I know that the animal is trapped on Erev Yom Tov, Beyadua she'me'erev Yom Tov nitzodo umutarin. And therefore it's going to be mutar. Ha-sveika, the other case where it is a safek, so here we add a couple of words. Again, it's similar to the chasurei mechasra that we had on the Mishnah. It's almost like a chasurei mechasra on the Braitas. We said like this: Ha-sveika, if there's a safek, na'aseh k'mishin itzodu b'yom tov asurin. If there's a safek, then that is equivalent to the case where I know that it was for sure trapped on Yom Tov, and therefore that's going to be forbidden. Right, so don't make the deal from the Sefer. The Sefer is just the illustration of the case which is the same as the Safek, where it's going to be forbidden. So yeah, right. So in other words, if we look back at the Braita, we said the Braita said Shochtim min hanagarim b'yom tov lo min harashatot min hamachmorot. So there's not really over here. There's not really a machloket. The Tanakama said that you cannot take the animals from the traps. Tanakama of this Braita, and then Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar came and he gave the different illustrations, the different examples of this. So therefore, over here we say Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel halacha ke Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. That is the way that we indeed paskin. So three different opinions as to what Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel was talking about when he said where he said halacha is, but in all of them there is no real nafkamina. In all of them, whatever it is, we assume that this is the point, that safek muchan is going to be asur. If we're not sure when the animal was trapped, and it may have been, as long as it may have been on Yom Tov, then that's going to be forbidden, and we're not going to allow that out of muktzah. After Yom Tov is of course going to be a different story, because then there is no longer an issue of muktzah there. Rashi over here, he says halachak Rabbi Shimon. I mean, what essentially is he coming to? In the previous case, right, where we saw there was a machloket, for example, between Rabban Gamliel and Tanakama, Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua, I understand why it is that Rabbi Yehuda Mashmal is coming to tell me who the halacha follows. What is the chiddush when he says the halacha is like over here is like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar? So Rashi says halacha Rabbi Shimon, de amar safek muchan asur. Right, he said that the safek is forbidden. V'heicha dabar mitza'an mekukarin metmo yesh lismoch denitzodo mibod yom. The point is, the chiddush of Yah is not the chumrah, but it's the kula. Even though he says safek muchan is asur, his point is when you come and you find the traps that they are broken already from before Yom Tov, so then yesh lismoch denitzodo mibod yom. Even though you haven't seen the animal, and you might have thought you don't really know for sure, but the point is you do know for sure that it's you do know for sure that it was trapped before, and that's not considered a safek, and therefore that would be permitted. So this is what we saw, by the way, in the Shulchan Aruch yesterday. I'll skip through it very quickly because we hadn't seen it yet in the Gemara. Back up on the screen. Right, this is the Shulchan Aruch about the third siman of Hilchot Yom Tov. It's called Dinei Hachana BeYom Tov. We spoke about sadin, right, trapping animals and giving them food, etc. So we said here, this is what we saw. Seif Gimel. said the Shulchan Aruch, afilu safek tzeda asur, כגון מצודות חיה, דגים ועופות שהיו פרוסות מערב יום טוב ולמחר מוציא בהם. אסור, right? So you had your traps out before Yom Tov and you found animals in them on Yom Tov, that's אסור. אסורים, אלא אם כן ידוע שניצודו מבעוד יום. Okay, that's forbidden unless we know that the animal was trapped before Yom Tov. ואם מצא מצודות מקולקלות מבערב יום טוב, but, this is what we said, if you find the traps that are broken before Yom Tov, so then בידוע שמערב Yom Tov ניצודו. That is enough to tell me that it was trapped before Yom Tov, and then that's okay, it's not considered a safek. And the Mishnah Berurah explains here like Rashi. It says, כלומר, שהמצודות פרוסות באורך רב, right? These traps are put out a very long route. וכשהחיה נופלת בראשו אחד, the animal gets trapped on the one side, מתוך שמתפרקת ומתנתקת לצאת, it tries to get out, מתקלקלות כולן, the entire trap now gets, the animal's still trapped there, but the entire trap is not, was connected to the ground or whatever, it's gone. וראשון השני גם כן ניתק ממקום שנתקע. Okay, that's exactly, it's just quoting Rashi verbatim. That's the point. Even though where I was, I saw the other side of the trap, and I didn't see any animal inside, nonetheless, that is a sign, that is a clear sign that an animal is trapped on the other side. Now, by the way, the next ifya on the Shulchan Aruch is interesting, because we know that practically speaking, there's essentially not really any difference between Yom Tov Rishon and Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galuyot. Obviously, if you're in Galuyot, if you're in Eretz Yisrael, there is no Yom Tov Sheni. Not now getting into the question of a Ben Eretz Yisrael, B'chutz La'aretz, Ben Chutz La'aretz, whatever. That's a separate issue. But even though Yom Tov Sheni is a din d'Rabbanan, nonetheless, Chachamim established it in such a way that it has all the same dinim as Yom Tov Rishon. As we learned earlier along in the Mishnah, one exception to that rule is regarding a mate. Okay, which even again it's questionable whether nowadays, according to the Gemara said earlier on, that Yom Tov Sheni Chachamim established like Chol regarding dealing with a met. But Moshe Feinstein says nowadays that no longer applies. There were cases I mentioned to you as well during the COVID pandemic, for example, where burials were taking place on Yom Tov Sheni because there was just so many. Rahman al-Islan. But in any event, but we have the same dinim. But here, have a look at the Seif Dalet in the Shulchan Aruch. He says, Safek muchan mutar b'Yom Tov Sheni mishum davei sfek sveika. Okay, so Safek muchan, if you're not sure if the animal is trapped on Yom Tov or not, so on Yom Tov Sheni, it's going to be mutar. Why? Because it's a Safek in the first place, and yeah, this is going to be a sfek sveika. Mishnah Berurah points out, first of all, when you say regarding Yom Tov Sheni, that's only Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galiyot. That does not apply to Yom Tov Sheni Shel Rosh Hashanah. As we know, Yom Tov Sheni Shel Rosh Hashanah works a little bit differently, and Chachamim established it as one Yom HaArichta, as one long day. V'chein b'Yom Tov Sheni Samuch l'Shabbat. Also, if Yom Tov Sheni is Samuch l'Shabbat, this would also not apply. But essentially, we say it's a Sfeik Sveika. What is the Sfeik Sveika? Explains the Mishnah Berurah. He says, Shema ein Yom Yom Tov. So maybe you'll say that it's the second day of Yom Tov. It's not actually Yom Tov, right? We treat it as Yom Tov, but it's not actually. Only one of the days is really Kodesh, and one of the days is Chol. So Shema Eina Yom Yom Tov. That's one safek. V'Shema Nitzot Metmol Ukvahuchan, and maybe the animal is actually trapped the previous day. Okay. So even if Miman Afshah. Even if today is the previous day was the Chol and today's Kodesh, well then the animal is trapped on Chol. And if we say that the previous day was Kodesh, the animal was doing the Kodesh, well then today's Chol. So therefore you have the Sfeik Sveika, and that's going to be Mutar. Okay, so you might have said even though it's a Sfeik, even if it's a Sfeik Sveika, nonetheless it's still a Davar Sheyesh Lo Matirin, because after Yom Tov Sheni it's going to be allowed. כיוון דו ספק ספקה גמורה, להתר אין כאן איסור כלל. So he says, no, this is a complete ספק ספקה, and therefore there's no reason to be מחמיר. ויש חולקים בזה, of course there are those who argue and say he should be מחמיר. וספירה להוא, דלדידן יום טוב שני לא מטעם ספק, הוא שבקיננו בקביע דיילך. This is one of the most common questions, comes up every year. Rabbi, why do we have to keep Yom Tov Sheni nowadays, right? It's not, we don't have a suffix anymore. We know when the calendar is. I always tell people, yes, we've known for 2,000 years. When the Gemara says, when the Gemara says they were keeping Yom Tov Sheni, they also knew when the calendar was, but never mind. So since we know objectively which day it is, we're only doing it as a minhag because once upon a time it was a suffix. So nowadays, we don't actually treat it as a safek anymore, but we treat it as a Yom Tov Vaday min Rabbanan. Therefore, you would say in Kanyan Safek Echad Vasur. So how do we paskin? Which opinion do we follow? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Yesh lachmir kisvazoim lo makom hefsed gadol. He says that the machmir opinion over here makes a lot of sense, but if there is a great hefsed, is a great loss, then you can rely on the lenient opinion. There is regarding Sveik Mukhan, which is a Sveik Sveika, regarding Yom Tov Sheni Shal Galiot. Okay, so we got up to the 2 dots. I think it's always a good place to start, about halfway down the Amud. Next week,
I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
Do we apply Rove in this case? So, for example, if you know that there were 9 animals that were trapped before Yontif, you come around Yontif and there's a 10th animal, but you don't know which one it is. Would that be permissible or not?
So if we're saying over here that we're going to be machmir for the safek, you're saying if we have a safek and a rov. Seemingly it would depend on why. Seemingly it would depend on why we're being machmir. If we're being machmir because of davar sheyesh lo matirin, so davar sheyesh lo matirin, we're not going to even be'eref lo batil. If it's not because of that, so then maybe there is. So I don't know. I have to see what the poskim say about that, but I would think that it's probably dependent on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yashkach everybody.
Purim Sameach.
Wonderful Purim. We'll see you soon.
Easy, go fast.